Henry Marlowe's hands gripped the steering wheel as he pulled into the gravel driveway. The two-story colonial house looked the same as it had 2 years ago: white shutters, wraparound porch, American flag hanging limp in the November air. But everything felt different now. Wrong. We don't have to do this, Tess had said that morning, her voice gentle but firm. You know what they're like. He'd wanted to listen. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, drive back to his workshop, and pretend this day didn't exist. But Ash sat in his car seat behind him, 3 years old and curious about the world, deserving more than Henry's bitter memories. 2 hours, Henry muttered to himself. We stay 2 hours, then we leave. He twisted around to check on Ash. The boy sat quietly, his dark eyes taking in everything. Yen's eyes. The thought hit him like it always did, sharp and sudden. She should have been here. She should have been the one carrying the covered dish, smoothing Ash's hair, reminding Henry to be patient with his parents. But Yen was gone, and Henry was alone with their son and his own stubborn need to give Ash what he never had: family. Henry pulled the special meal from the trunk. He'd prepared everything himself: plain rice, grilled chicken cut into small pieces, steamed carrots. Ash's allergies made eating anywhere risky, but Henry had learned to manage. Control what he could control. Remember what we practiced? Henry said to Ash as they walked to the front door. If you feel sick or scared, you touch my hand twice. Okay. Ash nodded solemnly. The door opened before Henry could knock. His mother stood there, dressed in her Sunday best despite it being Thursday. Blythe Marlowe had always been thin, but grief or something else had carved her face into sharp angles. Henry. Her voice was flat. You came. I said I would. He shifted Ash to his other arm. This is Ash. Blythe's eyes swept over her grandson with the same expression she'd once used to examine produce at the grocery store. He's small for 3. He's perfect. Henry's voice carried a warning. Of course. Blythe stepped aside. Your father's in the living room. The house smelled like turkey and disappointment. Henry followed his mother through the hallway lined with family photos, none of which included Yen or Ash. He'd noticed that at the funeral, too. 27 years of his life reduced to high school graduation and military portraits. Cordell Marlowe sat in his leather recliner, still wearing his sheriff's uniform despite retiring 5 years ago. The old man looked up from his newspaper and smiled the same political smile Henry remembered from campaign seasons. Son. Cordell stood and extended his hand. Good to see you. Henry shook it briefly. Dad, and this must be the boy. Cordell's gaze fell on Ash. He looks like you did at that age, before you got all those foreign ideas. The comment landed exactly where Cordell intended. Henry's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ash pressed closer against his chest. Dinner's almost ready, Blythe announced. I made your favorite stuffing. Actually, I brought food for Ash. Henry held up the container. His allergies. Allergies. Blythe's mouth pursed. In my day, children ate what was put in front of them. In your day, children died from things we can prevent now. Henry's voice stayed level, but his grip on Ash tightened. This isn't negotiable. Cordell chuckled. Still the same stubborn boy. Remember when you insisted on joining the Air Force instead of following me into law enforcement? Look how that turned out. It turned out fine. I served my country, learned a trade, met my wife. Henry emphasized the last 2 words. No regrets. Your wife. Blythe's voice took on a different quality, softer, but somehow more cutting. Such a tragedy. A young mother taken so suddenly. Makes you wonder about God's plan. Henry stared at her. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, dear. Just that the Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes he removes obstacles we don't even know we have. The words hung in the air like smoke. Henry felt something cold settle in his stomach, but before he could respond, Blythe was bustling toward the kitchen, talking about cranberry sauce and timing. Dinner was a minefield. Henry sat between Ash and the window, his back to the wall, old habits from his military days. Ash ate his special meal, while the adults passed dishes and made conversation that felt more like verbal sparring. So you're still playing with wood in that little shop, Cordell said, cutting into his turkey. When are you going to get a real job? I have a real job. I run a precision wood shop. Custom furniture, restoration work. It pays well, but no security, no pension. No future. Cordell shook his head. You could still apply for the sheriff's department. I still have friends there. I'm not interested in being a cop. Why not? Too good for it now. Think you're better than your old man. Henry set down his fork. I think I'm different than you. That's not the same thing. Blythe cleared her throat. Perhaps we could talk about something more pleasant. How is Ash doing in daycare? He's not in daycare. He stays with me at the shop. There's a play area set up in the back. That's not healthy for a child, Blythe said. He needs structure, discipline, other children to play with. He needs his father, especially now. What he needs, Cordell interjected, is a firm hand. Boy's 3 years old and still doesn't talk. That's not normal. Henry's blood pressure spiked. Ash is nonverbal. It's neurological, not behavioral. We're working with specialists. Specialists. Cordell snorted. In my day, we call that being spoiled. Kid needs to know he can't get everything he wants by pointing and grunting. Henry stood so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood. That's enough. Sit down, Henry. Blythe's voice was sharp. You're making a scene. I'm protecting my son from ignorant comments. Ignorant? Cordell's face reddened. I raised 4 kids. You're the only one who turned out ungrateful. Ungrateful for what? The constant criticism? The passive-aggressive comments about my wife? The way you pretend Ash doesn't exist unless you're insulting him. I'm trying to help that boy become a man. Someone has to, since his father won't. Henry reached for Ash. We're leaving. No. Blythe stood too, her voice suddenly desperate. You just got here. We haven't had dessert. We've had enough. Please. Something in Blythe's tone made Henry pause. It's been 2 years since we've seen you. 2 years since we've been a family. Can't we try to make this work? Henry looked at his mother, really looked at her. She seemed smaller somehow, older. Maybe grief had changed her too. Maybe they could find some middle ground. 1 hour, he said finally. Then we leave. Relief flooded Blythe's face. Of course. Let me get the pie. And I made hot cider. Your favorite. The cider was too sweet. Henry noticed it immediately when Blythe handed him the mug, but he didn't want to restart the argument. Ash had his own cup of water, which Henry had filled from the tap himself. Drink up, Cordell said, raising his own mug. Blythe puts a special ingredient in hers. Family secret. Henry took a sip to be polite. The liquid burned, slightly going down, probably too much cinnamon. Ash reached for his water cup, but Henry guided it away from his cider. They moved to the living room for dessert. Pumpkin pie with whipped cream, served on Blythe's good china. Henry ate a few bites while Ash explored the coffee table, running his small fingers along the wooden edges. He's a quiet one, Cordell observed. Almost unnatural how quiet he is. He's processing. Henry's defense of his son was automatic now. He takes in everything. Watches, learns, remembers. If you say so. Cordell sipped his cider. Seems like he needs more discipline to me. Structure. Rules. The room felt warm. Too warm. Henry loosened his collar and took another drink of cider, hoping it would help. Instead, his throat felt scratchy. Are you all right, dear? Blythe was watching him closely. You look pale. Just tired. Henry rubbed his forehead. A headache was building behind his eyes, dull and persistent. Long day, but it wasn't just fatigue. Something was wrong. His vision seemed slightly off, like looking through dirty glass. His stomach churned uneasily. Ash made a small sound, not quite distress, but close. Henry looked over to see his son pressing a hand to his chest, his breathing shallow. Ash. Henry tried to stand, but the room tilted. His legs felt weak, unsteady. Ash, what's wrong? The boy's face was pale, his lips taking on a bluish tint. He reached toward Henry with shaking hands. Something's wrong. Henry's words slurred slightly. Something's wrong with him. Maybe he's just tired too, Blythe said, but her voice seemed to come from far away. Children get fussy when they're tired. Henry tried to move toward his son, but his coordination was failing. The mug slipped from his hands, shattering on the hardwood floor. Hot cider splashed across his shoes. Need to? Henry reached for his phone, but his fingers wouldn't work properly. Need to call. Ash made another sound, this one clearly distressed. The boy's breathing was becoming labored, his small chest rising and falling too quickly. Dad. Henry's voice was barely a whisper. Something's wrong. Call 911. But Cordell didn't move. Neither did Blythe. They both sat watching, their expressions eerily calm. This solves a lot of problems, Cordell said quietly. If those two weren't here, the words hit Henry like ice water, but his body wouldn't respond. He tried to lunge toward Ash, but his knees buckled. The room spun wildly as he hit the floor. Ash, he gasped, his vision graying at the edges. Ash, his son's face was the last thing he saw before darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned in pieces. First came the steady beeping of monitors, then the antiseptic smell of hospital air. Henry's throat felt raw, his head pounding with each heartbeat. He's waking up. The voice was unfamiliar. Henry forced his eyes open, squinting against the fluorescent lights. A nurse in blue scrubs was checking his foreline. Mr. Marlowe? How are you feeling? Ash. The name came out as a croak. Where's my son? He's stable. Room 314. Still sleeping, but his vitals are good. Henry tried to sit up, but the nurse gently pressed him back down. You need to take it easy. You've been unconscious for 12 hours. 12 hours. The timeline didn't make sense. What happened? Where are my parents? The nurse's expression shifted. The police are here to talk to you. Are you feeling up to answering some questions? Before Henry could respond, two uniformed officers entered the room. The older one, a sergeant named Mills, introduced himself and his partner. Mr. Marlowe, we need to talk about what happened last night at your parents' house. I don't know what happened. We were having dinner then. Henry struggled to remember. Ash got sick. I got sick. My father said something. What did he say? The memory surfaced like a bubble breaking. Cordell's calm voice, the words that didn't make sense. He said this solved a lot of problems. That if we weren't there, the officers exchanged glances. Mr. Marlowe, your parents are dead. The words didn't compute. Henry stared at the sergeant, waiting for the punchline or the mistake. What? Carbon monoxide poisoning. Probably from a faulty heater. We found them this morning when the neighbor came to check on them. That's impossible. Henry's voice was stronger now, fueled by disbelief. They had a new HVAC system installed 2 years ago. After Yin's funeral, Blythe complained about the cost. The officers looked at each other again. We'll make note of that. The fire marshal is still investigating. This wasn't an accident. Henry was fully alert now, his mind working despite the lingering effects of whatever had poisoned him. They did something to us, to me and Ash. The doctors found elevated levels of ethylene glycol in both your systems, the younger officer said. Antifreeze. But that doesn't make sense with carbon monoxide poisoning. Henry's engineering background kicked in. Ethylene glycol was sweet-tasting, colorless, easy to hide inside her. But carbon monoxide was odorless, invisible. 2 different poisons, 2 different delivery methods. I want to see my son. In a minute. We need to finish. Now. Henry's voice carried the authority he'd learned in the military. My son almost died last night. I'm not answering any more questions until I know he's okay. The nurses wheeled him to room 314. Ash lay in a bed that dwarfed his small frame, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors tracking his vital signs. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Henry, he raised one small hand. Henry took it gently. Hey, buddy. How are you feeling? Ash squeezed his fingers twice their signal for scared. I know, but we're safe now. The doctors are taking good care of you. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Mr. Marlowe? I'm Detective Lorna Mays. Henry looked up to see a woman in her 40s, wearing a badge and a skeptical expression. She had graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. I need to ask you some questions about last night. I already talked to the officers. I know. But something doesn't add up. Detective Mays pulled up a chair. Your parents died of carbon monoxide poisoning, but you and your son were poisoned with antifreeze. That suggests 2 separate incidents, or one very planned incident. Mays studied him. What makes you say that? Henry was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Trust the system that had failed him before, or handle this himself. But looking at Ash's pale face, he realized he couldn't risk being wrong. My father was a sheriff for 30 years. He knew how investigations work, what evidence looks for, How to make things look accidental. You think your father tried to kill you? I think my father tried to kill me and make it look like a family tragedy. Carbon monoxide gets everyone, but we were supposed to die first from the antifreeze. That way, when they found us, it would look like a faulty heater took out the whole family. Detective Mays wrote something in her notebook. Why would he want to kill you? Henry looked at Ash, sleeping peacefully despite everything. You have to ask him. But you can you? No, but I can ask questions. Like why your parents' carbon monoxide detector was disabled. Why the basement vent fan was running in reverse. Why there were traces of ethylene glycol on 2 coffee mugs, but not the others. Each fact hit Henry like a punch. His parents hadn't just tried to kill him, they'd been thorough about it. There's something else, Mays continued. Your father changed his will 3 weeks ago. Made some interesting provisions regarding your son. What kind of provisions? Ash inherits everything, but only if you're legally dead. The room went silent, except for the beeping monitors. Henry felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, not grief, not shock, but calculation. I want to go home. The doctors want to keep you both for observation. I want to go home, Henry repeated. Today. Detective Mays nodded slowly. I'll talk to the doctors. But Mr. Marlowe, don't leave town. This investigation is just getting started. After she left, Henry sat holding Ash's hand and staring out the window. The trees were bare now, stripped clean by November wind. Like everything else in his life, they'd been reduced to their essential elements. His parents were dead. They tried to kill him and Ash first, but something had gone wrong with their plan. Now he was alone with a 3-year-old boy and 1,000 questions, but he was alive. And that meant he could get answers. 3 days later, Henry stood in his parents' kitchen with a clipboard and a measuring tape. The police had released the scene, and as the only surviving family member, he had access to everything. Detective Mays had been thorough, but she'd been looking for evidence of an accident. Henry was looking for evidence of murder. The house felt different without his parents' presence, smaller somehow, as if their personalities had been the only things giving it substance. Henry moved methodically through each room, his engineer's mind cataloging details in the dining room. He found the first anomaly. The ventilation fan in the far wall was working, but the airflow was wrong. Henry climbed on a chair and removed the cover. Son of a bitch. The fan blades were turning, but they'd been wired backward. Instead of pulling air out of the room, they were pushing it in. Specifically, pushing it in from the basement where the water heater Saturday. Henry made a note and moved to the kitchen. 2 coffee mugs sat in the dishwasher, already washed. But the police had tested them first. Traces of ethylene glycol on both. He opened cabinets until he found what he was looking for, a half-empty bottle of antifreeze, tucked behind cleaning supplies. Fresh purchase, judging by the receipt, still stuck to the bottom. Dated 3 days before Thanksgiving. Planning ahead, Henry muttered. His phone buzzed. Tess, how are you holding up? I'm at the house, going through things. You don't have to do this alone, you know. I could come help. Henry considered it. Tess was one of the few people he trusted completely, but she was also emotional about death and families. She tried to talk him into grieving instead of investigating. I'm okay. Just need to understand what happened. The police said it was carbon monoxide. The police are wrong. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Henry, I know you're angry, but sometimes accidents. This wasn't an accident. His voice was flat, final. I'll call you later. He hung up and continued his search. In Cordell's office, he found the safe behind a fake law book. The combination was easy. His father had always used the same numbers, his badge number from his first year as a deputy. Inside were the usual documents, insurance papers, the deed to the house, birth certificates, but also a manila folder labeled Ash Legal. Henry's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a petition for emergency custody, already filled out and notarized. The accusations made his blood boil. Emotional instability, substance abuse, neglect of the child's medical needs. All lies. All carefully constructed lies designed to take Ash away from him. But the petition was dated 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. His parents had been planning this for months. Henry photographed everything with his phone, then put the folder back exactly where he'd found it. Let Detective Mays find it herself when she got around to searching more thoroughly. He was about to close the safe when he noticed something else. A small external hard drive, unlabeled. Henry pocketed it quickly. Back at his own house that evening, Ash was playing with wooden blocks while Henry made dinner. The boy seemed better, still quiet, but more alert, more present. Uncle Nico's coming over after dinner, Henry told him. He's going to help me with something. Ash looked up and smiled. Nico Walsh wasn't really his uncle, but the 19-year-old had been working in Henry's shop for 6 months and had become something like family. The kid was smart, loyal, and had a useful set of skills learned from growing up in foster care. Nico arrived at 8, carrying a laptop bag and looking curious. You sounded weird on the phone. What's going on? Henry handed him the external drive. I need you to crack this. See what's on it. Where'd you get it? My father's safe. Nico plugged the drive into his laptop and started typing. Password protected, but it's just Windows encryption. Give me a few minutes. While he worked, Henry made coffee and tried to organize his thoughts. The evidence was building. The reversed fan, the antifreeze, the custody papers. But motive was still unclear. Why now? Why this way? Got it. Nico's voice was tight. Henry, you need to see this. The laptop screen showed a folder full of audio files, each one dated and time-stamped. Henry clicked on the most recent one. Cordell's voice filled the room. The boy can be fixed, but not while Henry's around poisoning his mind with all that liberal nonsense. Ash needs structure, discipline, proper guidance. He needs to know what it means to be a Marlowe. Another file, this one Blythe. It's not natural the way that child acts. Henry indulges him, makes excuses. In my day, we didn't tolerate that kind of behavior. We fixed it. Henry's hands clenched into fists. More files revealed more details. Complaints about his parenting, speculation about Ash's condition, plans to rescue the boy from his father's influence. The final file was the worst. Cordell again, recorded just 4 days before Thanksgiving. I talked to Judge Morrison. He's sympathetic, but he needs documentation. Evidence of instability or neglect. If Henry had an accident, something stress-related, maybe involving alcohol or pills that would give us grounds for emergency custody. Henry stopped the recording. The room was silent except for the laptop's cooling fan. They were planning to kill you, Nico said quietly. They were planning to kill me and frame it as suicide or overdose. Then swoop in as the grieving grandparents who had to save their grandson. But something went wrong. Henry nodded. They underestimated the dose, or I have a higher tolerance, or Ash's smaller body processed it differently. We survived long enough for their backup plan to backfire. Nico closed the laptop. What are you going to do? Henry looked toward the living room, where Ash was building towers with his blocks. Innocent and trusting and completely unaware of how close he'd come to losing his father. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of people they really were. The next morning brought Detective Mays to Henry's front door. She looked tired, her usual professional composure slightly frayed. We need to talk. Henry let her in. Offering coffee, she declined. Ash was at the kitchen table, drawing with crayons, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he concentrated. I've been going through your parents' house more thoroughly, Mays said. Found some interesting things, such as a custody petition, pre-signed and notarized. Henry kept his expression neutral. Really? You don't seem surprised. Nothing about my parents surprises me anymore. Mays pulled out her notebook. There's also the matter of a letter they sent to Family Services, expressing concerns about your fitness as a parent. This was news to Henry. What kind of concerns? The usual stuff. Claims you're unstable since your wife's death, that you're isolating the boy, not getting him proper medical care. Mays watched Henry carefully. All unsubstantiated, of course. Social services investigated and found no evidence of neglect or abuse. When was this? 6 months ago. Right around the time you stopped bringing Ash to visit them. The timeline was clicking into place. Henry's decision to cut contact had triggered their more drastic plans. They tried legal channels first, failed, then moved to permanent solutions. Detective, can I show you something? Henry retrieved his phone and played one of the audio files from Cordell's drive. Mays listened without comment, her face growing grimmer. Where did you get this? Does it matter? It matters for evidence. If you obtained it illegally. I'm the executor of their estate. Everything in that house belongs to me now. Mays made a note. There are dozens of these files. Dozens. Going back months. The document everything. The custody petition, the family services complaint, conversations with judges and lawyers. And the plan to kill you. That too. Mays was quiet for a long moment, watching Ash color. The boy was drawing a house with careful precision, adding windows and doors and a chimney that spiraled smoke into a blue sky. Your son seems to be doing well. He's resilient. Kids are. The doctor said his language development is atypical but not necessarily problematic. He communicates in other ways. Henry nodded. He understands everything. Processes information differently than most people, but he's not disabled or delayed. Just unique. Your parents didn't see it that way. My parents saw what they wanted to see. A problem to be fixed instead of a child to be loved. May stood up. I'm going to need copies of those audio files. And I'll need you to come in for a formal statement. Am I under investigation? Everyone's under investigation until I understand what happened. But no, you're not a suspect. Hard to poison yourself and your son, then somehow avoid dying from carbon monoxide. After she left, Henry called Tess. Can you watch Ash for a few hours? I need to run some errands. Of course. Everything okay? Getting better. Henry's first stop was the county courthouse. Public records were exactly that, public. It took him 2 hours to find what he was looking for. Property records, building permits, inspection reports. His parents' house had indeed had a new HVAC system installed 18 months ago. Top-of-the-line equipment, professional installation, city inspection, and approval. The carbon monoxide detectors were hardwired into the system. Impossible to disable without tools and knowledge. But someone with tools and knowledge, say, a retired sheriff with 40 years of practical experience, could easily reverse a ventilation fan or disable a safety device. His second stop was Pastor Elijah's office at First Methodist. The elderly minister had known the Marlowe family for decades and had officiated at both Henry's wedding and Yin's funeral. Henry, the pastor stood and embraced him. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your parents were pillars of this community. Were they? Something in Henry's tone made the pastor step back. Please sit. How are you holding up? And how is little Ash? We're alive, which is more than my parents expected. Pastor Elijah frowned. I don't understand. They tried to kill us. Pastor. Poisoned us with antifreeze, then planned to die themselves from carbon monoxide, so it would look like a family tragedy. That's impossible. Your parents were good Christian people. They had a custody petition ready to file. They'd been recording conversations about taking Ash away from me. They saw him as broken and me as the problem. The pastor sat heavily in his chair. There must be some mistake. No mistake. The police have evidence. Audio recordings, chemical traces, physical proof. Pastor Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then, your father did come to see me a few weeks ago. He was concerned about Ash. Concerned how he felt the boy needed more structure. Religious guidance. He asked if I thought custody arrangements could be changed in cases of parental unfitness. Henry felt something cold settle in his stomach. What did you tell him? I told him that children belong with their parents unless there's clear evidence of abuse or neglect. I encouraged him to try to rebuild his relationship with you instead. But he kept pushing. The pastor nodded reluctantly. He mentioned Judge Morrison, asked if I'd be willing to testify about your family's church attendance, your state of mind since Yin's death. And I told him I couldn't do that. Whatever problems your family had, they needed to be worked out through love and communication, not legal warfare. Henry studied the older man's face. Pastor Elijah seemed genuinely distressed, but there was something else there. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Pastor, did my father ask you to do anything else? A long pause. He wanted me to talk to you. Convince you to let them have more time with Ash. Overnight visits, weekend stays. He said it would be better for everyone if it happened voluntarily. When was this conversation? The week before Thanksgiving. Henry stood up. Thank you for being honest. Henry, wait. I know you're angry, but your parents loved you. They loved Ash. Sometimes people make terrible decisions when they're desperate. Sometimes people make terrible decisions when they're selfish. Henry's voice was flat. There's a difference. That evening, After Ash was asleep, Henry sat at his kitchen table with Nico and Tess. The laptop was open between them, displaying file after file of evidence. "This is insane," Tess said for the third time. "I can't believe Cordell and Blythe would do something like this." "Believe it," Nico said. "The evidence is right here." "But why? What do they hope to gain?" Henry had been thinking about that question all day. Control. Legacy. The chance to raise Ash the way they thought he should be raised. By killing his father, by removing the obstacle to their vision of family. Tess shook her head. "It's monstrous." "It's practical," Henry corrected. "In their minds, I was the problem. Ash was salvageable, but only without my influence." Nico closed the laptop. "So what's the plan?" Henry looked at his friends, really looked at them. Tess with her gentle heart and unshakable moral compass. Nico with his street-smart pragmatism and fierce loyalty. Both of them willing to help him navigate this nightmare. The plan is to make sure everyone knows the truth. Over the next week, Henry threw himself into research with the same focused intensity he'd once brought to military engineering projects. The goal was simple: document everything, verify everything, build an unassailable case. Nico proved invaluable. The kid had learned to navigate bureaucratic systems during his years in foster care, and his computer skills opened doors that would have taken Henry weeks to find. "Look at this," Nico said, pointing to his laptop screen. "Judge Morrison's campaign contributions from last year. Guess who donated $5,000? Cordell. And look at this one. Another screen. The family services caseworker who investigated their complaint about you. She goes to your mom's church. Has for 10 years. Henry made notes in his growing file. The connections were becoming clear, a web of relationships and obligations that his parents had cultivated over decades of community involvement. Tess brought a different perspective. "You know what bothers me most? The recordings. They weren't just planning this, they were enjoying it. Listen to their voices when they talk about taking Ash away." She was right. There was satisfaction in Cordell's tone when he discussed fixing his grandson. Excitement in Blythe's voice when she imagined reshaping the boy according to her vision. They saw Ash as a project, Henry said. Something to be improved, not someone to be loved. The memorial service was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at First Methodist. Half the town would be there. Cordell and Blythe had been prominent citizens, involved in everything from the school board to the volunteer fire department. Henry had 3 days to prepare. On Thursday, he visited the church to discuss logistics with Pastor Elijah. The older man seemed nervous, distracted. "The family is invited to speak, of course," the pastor said. "Perhaps you could share some memories? Talk about your parents' legacy." "Oh, I'll definitely talk about their legacy." Something in Henry's tone made the pastor look up sharply. "Henry, I hope you're not planning to... That is, this isn't the time or place for what? For airing family grievances. People are coming to mourn, to celebrate your parents' lives. They don't need to hear about whatever conflicts you had with them." Henry studied the man who had baptized him, married him, buried his wife. "Pastor, do you believe in truth?" "Of course." "Do you believe people have a right to know the truth about the people they're mourning?" Pastor Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Sometimes the truth does more harm than good, and sometimes lies do more harm than truth." On Friday, Henry made copies of everything. Audio files burned to CDs, documents printed and organized in folders, a detailed timeline of events leading up to that night. He gave copies to Detective Mays, kept copies for himself, and sealed copies in a safety deposit box at the bank. That evening, he sat with Ash on the living room floor, building towers with wooden blocks. The boy had recovered completely from the poisoning, his color back to normal, his energy returning. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult," Henry told him. "We're going to say goodbye to your grandparents. There will be lots of people there, and they'll be sad." Ash looked up from his blocks and touched Henry's hand twice, their signal for scared. "I know, but we'll be okay. We'll tell the truth, and then we'll come home." Ash considered this, then handed Henry a block. Together, they built something new. On Saturday morning, Henry dressed carefully, his best suit, the one he'd worn to Yen's funeral. He helped Ash in his only dress, clothes, a small blazer and tie that made him look heartbreakingly grown up. "Ready?" Henry asked. Ash nodded solemnly. The church was packed. Henry recognized faces from his childhood teachers, neighbors, family friends. People who remembered him as Cordell's boy before he went off to the military and came back changed. Detective Mays was there too, sitting in the back row with a clear view of the exits. She caught Henry's eye and nodded slightly. Pastor Elijah conducted the service with his usual dignity, speaking about faith and community and the comfort of God's love. He invited several people to share memories: Cordell's former deputy, Blythe's church circle leader, a school board colleague. All of them talked about service and dedication and family values. None of them mentioned the investigation or the questions surrounding the deaths. Finally, Pastor Elijah looked toward Henry. "Would you like to say something about your parents?" Henry stood up, Ash in his arms. The church went silent, hundreds of people waiting to hear from the grieving son. "My parents believed in legacy," Henry began. "They believed in leaving something behind, in shaping the future according to their vision." Murmurs of agreement from the congregation. They also believed in control, in making sure things happened the way they thought they should happen. The murmurs quieted. Henry reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I'd like you to hear something. These are my father's own words, recorded just days before he died." He pressed play. Cordell's voice filled the church. "The boy can be fixed, but not while Henry's around poisoning his mind. Ash needs structure, discipline, proper guidance. He needs to know what it means to be a Marlowe." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. People turned to look at each other, confusion and disbelief on their faces. Henry stopped the recording. "That's what my parents thought of their grandson. Not a child to be loved, but a problem to be solved." Pastor Elijah stood up. "Henry, please. There's more." Henry pressed play again. This time it was Blythe's voice. If Henry had an accident, something stress-related, maybe involving alcohol or pills that would give us grounds for emergency custody. The church erupted. Voices raised in shock, people standing up, demanding explanations as Henry's voice cut through the noise. "They tried to kill me and my son on Thanksgiving night. Poisoned us with antifreeze, then planned to die themselves so it would look like a family tragedy. They had custody papers ready, bribes prepared, lies documented." "That's enough." Pastor Elijah's voice boomed through the microphone. "This is a house of God, not a courtroom." "Then let's talk about God," Henry shot back. "Let's talk about the commandment against murder, against bearing false witness, against coveting what belongs to your neighbor." He looked out at the congregation, people he'd known his entire life, people who had respected and trusted his parents. "My mother and father were not good people. They were manipulative, racist, and cruel. They saw my son as defective and me as disposable. And when they couldn't get what they wanted through legal means, they decided to take it through murder." The church was in chaos now. Some people were leaving, others were shouting questions, still others sat in stunned silence. Detective Mays stood up in the back. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. There is an ongoing investigation into the deaths of Cordell and Blythe Marlowe. What Mr. Marlowe has shared today is evidence in that investigation." "Evidence of what?" someone called out. "Evidence of attempted murder," Mays replied clearly. "And conspiracy to commit fraud." Henry walked down the center aisle, Ash still in his arms. People shrank back from him as if he carried some contagion that the church doors. He turned back to face the congregation. "My parents' legacy isn't service or dedication. It's hatred and greed. Remember that when you think about them." By Monday morning, the story had exploded across social media and local news. "Former sheriff accused of murder plot" ran as the headline in the county paper, with a sidebar article about the ongoing investigation. Henry's phone rang constantly, reporters, neighbors, people he hadn't spoken to in years. He ignored most of them, but answered when Detective Mays called. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," she said. "Good. People needed to know. The state attorney's office is taking over the investigation. This is bigger than a local case now." Henry wasn't surprised. Cordell's connections ran deep, and if he'd been planning murder, other people might have been involved. What about Pastor Elijah? What about him? He knew about the custody plan, encouraged it even. Knowing about something and participating in it are different things. Unless you have evidence he was actively involved, Henry did have evidence, but he wasn't ready to share it yet. The pastor's involvement was more subtle sins of omission rather than commission. That afternoon, Tess stopped by with groceries and moral support. Ash was napping, giving them a chance to talk freely. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than expected. It feels good to have the truth out there. Some people are saying you made it all up, that you're having some kind of breakdown." Henry had expected that. "What do you think?" "I think you're the sanest person I know. I also think you've made some powerful enemies." She was right about that, too. Judge Morrison had issued a statement denying any improper relationship with Cordell Marlowe. The family services caseworker had requested a transfer to another county. Pastor Elijah had announced he was taking a leave of absence for health reasons. But other people were coming forward with their own stories. A former deputy talked about cases that had been buried during Cordell's tenure. A lawyer mentioned being pressured to drop complaints against the sheriff's department. A social worker described feeling intimidated when she tried to investigate wealthy families. The pattern was becoming clear. Cordell Marlowe had used his position to protect friends and punish enemies for decades. His attempt to murder Henry and Ash was just the most extreme example of his corruption that on Tuesday, Henry received an unexpected visitor. Detective Mays arrived with a man in an expensive suit, someone from the state attorney's office. "Mr. Marlowe, this is Assistant D.A. Thompson. He has some questions about your parents' estate." Henry invited them in, serving coffee while Ash played with his blocks in the corner. "We've been reviewing your parents' financial records," Thompson said. "There are some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "Large cash deposits over the past 6 months. Payment from sources we can identify." Henry wasn't surprised. "Bribed? Possibly. Or payments for services rendered. We're trying to trace the money." They talked for an hour, going over timelines and connections. Henry provided what information he could, but warned them about trusting anyone from his parents' social circle. "Corruption runs deep in small towns," he said, "especially when the corrupt person has been in power for 30 years. After they left, Henry called Nico. "Can you do some more digging? I want to know where my parents got their money." "Already on it. Found some interesting stuff." They met at Henry's shop that evening. Nico had printouts spread across the workbench, bank records, property transfers, business filings. "Your dad was busy after he retired," Nico said. "Consulting work for security companies, private investigation services, expert witness testimony in court cases. All legal. Mostly. But look at this." Nico pointed to a series of payments. $20,000 from Shell Company 3 months ago. Another $15,000 last month. For what? That's the question. The Shell Company is registered to an address that doesn't exist. Phone number goes to a voicemail that's never been set up. Henry studied the papers. Someone was paying him to do something they didn't want traced back to them. And whatever it was worth enough to commit murder over. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Judge Morrison had been arrested for accepting bribes and tampering with evidence. The family services caseworker had been suspended pending investigation. 3 more local officials were under scrutiny. Henry watched the news coverage with grim satisfaction. His parents' death had pulled the thread that was unraveling years of corruption, but he also knew the story wasn't over. Powerful people didn't go down without a fight, and Henry had made himself the face of their downfall. That evening, as he was closing up his shop, a car pulled into the parking lot. Henry recognized it immediately, Judge Morrison's black Mercedes, despite the judge being in jail. The driver was Morrison's son, a lawyer named Blake who had inherited his father's arrogance and sense of entitlement. "Marlowe." Blake Morrison climbed out of the car, his expensive suit rumpled and his face flushed with anger. Henry didn't respond, just locked the shop door and started toward his truck. "You think you're some kind of hero." Blake continued. "You've destroyed good people's lives with your lies and conspiracies. I've exposed corruption with evidence and truth. Evidence you stole. Truth you manufactured." Henry turned to face the younger man. "Your father took bribes. Your father conspired with mine to frame me as an unfit parent. Your father was going to help them steal my son. Prove it." Henry pulled out his phone and played another audio file, one he hadn't shared at the church. Cordell's voice filled the parking lot. "Morrison's on board. $20,000 up front, 20 more when the custody transfer is complete. He'll make sure the hearing goes our way. Blake's face went white. That doesn't prove anything. It proves your father's a criminal, just like mine was. Blake stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. You're going to pay for this. All of it. Henry didn't move. Is that a threat? It's a promise. After Blake drove away, Henry called Detective Mays and reported the encounter. She promised to have patrol cars drive by his house and shop more frequently. But Henry knew that wouldn't be enough. He'd declared war on people who had everything to lose, and they wouldn't hesitate to fight back. The wrongful death lawsuit took 6 months to prepare. Henry's attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah Chun, who specialized in police corruption cases, built a meticulous case around the evidence Henry had gathered. We're not just suing for damages, she explained during one of their meetings. We're suing to prevent them from being memorialized. No foundations, no scholarships, no buildings named after them. That was exactly what Henry wanted. His parents had spent their lives building a reputation based on lies. He wanted that reputation destroyed so completely that no one would ever again mistake them for heroes. The case went to trial in October, almost a year after the attempted murder. Henry testified for 2 days, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every audio recording, every document that proved his parents' guilt. The defense tried to paint him as an unstable widower seeking revenge against loving grandparents. But the physical evidence was overwhelming, and the corruption investigation had exposed so many connected crimes that the jury couldn't ignore the pattern. The verdict was unanimous. Cordell and Blythe Marlowe had attempted to murder Henry and Ash Marlowe for financial gain. The estate was liable for damages, legal fees, and punitive awards totaling over $2 million. But money wasn't what Henry wanted. What he wanted came in the judge's final ruling. This court finds that Cordell and Blythe Marlowe were not fit to be honored or memorialized in any public capacity. Any foundations, scholarships, or community projects bearing their names shall be dissolved and renamed. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when Henry emerged. He made a brief statement. Justice has been served. My parents were not good people, and now everyone knows it. My son and I can finally move on with our lives. Later that evening, Detective Mays stopped by his house with unexpected news. We found something else in your father's safe deposit box. Something he never told you about. She handed him a sealed envelope marked Henry Private. Inside was a single sheet of paper. DNA test results showing that Cordell Marlowe was not Henry's biological father. Henry stared at the document, trying to process its implications. When was this done? 6 months ago. Right around the time he started planning the custody scheme. He knew he wasn't my father, but he still tried to kill me. Apparently finding out you weren't his blood relative made it easier to justify. Henry folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. The information explained some things: his parents' increasing hostility, their willingness to go so far to get Ash, but it didn't change anything fundamental. What will you do with this? Mays asked. Henry walked to the fireplace and threw the envelope into the flames. Nothing. It doesn't matter who my biological father was. I am who I chose to become. On a cold December morning, Henry stood at his parents' graves with a thermos of hot cider. The cemetery was empty except for him. No mourners, no flowers, no signs that anyone remembered or cared about the people buried here. The headstones were simple granite markers with just names and dates. Henry had refused to approve any epitaphs or flowery language about beloved parents or community servants. He poured the cider onto the frozen ground, watching it steam in the cold air. You always did like a bitter ending, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away, never looking back. The new house was taking shape on the edge of Tessa's flower farm. Henry was doing most of the work himself, with help from Nico and a few other friends. It would be smaller than his parents' house, but better built and designed around what he and Ash actually needed. Foundation solid, Nico observed as they worked on framing the walls. Should last forever. That's the idea. Ash played nearby, building his own structures with wooden scraps and offcuts. He was talking more now, still not in complete sentences, but clear words that Henry understood perfectly. House. Ash said, pointing to their work. That's right. Our house. Tess came over from the farm with sandwiches and lemonade. She and Henry had grown closer over the past year, but they were taking things slowly. Both of them had been hurt before, and both understood the value of building something solid rather than rushing into something that might collapse. The insurance settlement came through. Henry told her over lunch. How much? Enough. Enough to finish the house, set up a college fund for Ash, maybe expand shop, and enough to stop working if you wanted to. Henry considered that. I don't want to stop working. Work gives life structure, purpose. Besides, Ash likes to shop. He's learning to use tools, understanding how things fit together. As if summoned by his name, Ash came over and tugged on Henry's sleeve. He pointed toward the road where a delivery truck was approaching. Mail, Ash said clearly. The driver handed Henry a registered letter from a law firm he didn't recognize. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note explaining that it was Cordell's life insurance payout money that had been frozen during the investigation but was now being released to Henry as the sole beneficiary. Cordell's final irony. Trying to kill his son, only to leave him even more financially secure. Henry endorsed the check over to the county children's shelter, along with a note specifying that it be used for nonverbal and special needs children. That evening, after Ash was asleep, Henry sat on his front porch with Tess. The stars were clear and bright, unpolluted by city lights. Any regrets? She asked. Henry thought about it carefully. About exposing them? No. About the way it had to happen? Maybe. I would have preferred they just left us alone. But they couldn't do that. No. They saw Ash as broken and me as the person who broke him. In their minds, we were problems to be solved. Tess was quiet for a moment. What if they'd succeeded? What if you died that night? Then Ash would have grown up believing he was damaged, believing he needed to be fixed, believing his father was weak and unstable. Henry's voice hardened. That was never going to happen. A year later, Henry received a letter from Pastor Elijah, who had moved to a small church in Tennessee. The pastor wrote about forgiveness and redemption, about moving past anger and finding peace with God. Henry read it once, then threw it away. Some things didn't deserve forgiveness. Some people couldn't be redeemed. And sometimes the most Christian thing you could do was make sure everyone knew the truth about wolves in sheep's clothing. The house was finished by spring. Henry and Ash had a housewarming party with their real family. Tess, Nico, Detective Mays, even Sarah Chin the lawyer. People who had chosen to love them, not people who claimed to love them because of blood or obligation. Ash was starting to talk in full sentences now, his intelligence and personality flowering in an environment free from criticism and judgment. He helped Henry in the shop, learned to read with Tess, and played elaborate games with wooden blocks that showed a mind capable of complex spatial reasoning. He's going to be fine, Tess said one evening as they watched him build a castle complete with towers and bridges. He was always going to be fine, Henry replied. He just needed people who saw him as perfect the way he was. As summer approached, Henry began getting calls from other parents, people dealing with family courts and custody battles, and relatives who thought they knew better. He listened to their stories and offered advice when he could that he'd won his war, but there were others still fighting theirs. Sometimes justice required patience. Sometimes it required strategy. And sometimes it required the willingness to burn everything down and build something better from the ashes. Henry had done all three, and he'd won. On his own terms, the past was over. The future belonged to him and his son.